Welcome to Actualize, a podcast focused on the intersection of performance, ambition, and mental health. I'm your host, Rob Pintwala. My goal for the show is to not only celebrate success, but also shed light on the challenges and sacrifices that come with ambition. Actualize is brought to you by First Session. Launched in 2019, I started First Session to help you find the right therapist. First Session is purposely designed more like a dating website than a clinical website, as we're completely focused on helping you find the right fit the first time. My team and I interview and vet our partner therapists, so you can simply browse videos, see who you vibe with, and instantly book a session. Check us out at firstsession.com and see why more than 7,000 Canadians have chosen First Session to find a therapist. This episode is with Annie MacIntosh. Annie is a content creator, marketer, and Masters of Counseling student living in Vancouver BC. In the episode, we start off by discussing Annie's role as a content creator and influencer and her love for nature, before diving deeper into her experience living with depression, how she takes care of her mental health, and more about her desire to help others as she completes her master's program. I hope you enjoy this episode with Annie MacIntosh. Thank you so much for joining me on this October afternoon here in BC.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Wanted to get started by just asking you a little bit more how you describe what you do and all the things that you do in terms of, how you keep busy.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of been a bit of a all over the place journey for sure, but right now I'm freelancing. Yeah, as a social media manager, photographer, content creator, and I'm also in school full time, doing my master's degree in counseling psychology. So that's kind of the headlines of what I'm doing right now.
Amazing. Sounds like a lot to juggle at once.
Yeah, it has been. It's been fun though. I feel like I'm the kind of person who needs to be pretty busy.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Absolutely. And I initially reached out because, I saw that you were completing your master's in counseling program, which, as far as my experience, is kind of one of the main programs to become a counselor or therapist, at least in Canada. Is that your intention, or do you not know yet? Like, how's that going for you?
Yeah, so the program that I'm in and most other like master's counseling programs, that is what you need to register with like the provincial body because it's provincially regulated in Canada. So yeah, the goal is to become a RCC, which is a registered clinical counselor when I graduate. And I think I would like to do private practice. I definitely want to be a therapist and like work in that capacity. I think yeah, just some experience in playing around into more specifically what type of therapy and work I wanna do. I'm excited for that part, but yeah, definitely working as a therapist is the goal.
That's exciting. That's super exciting. I find myself now knowing like over 1,000 therapists since I started this company. So I can say that every therapist I've met is like deep down a really well intentioned, like good person. And it's been a really good journey on my side. So what led you? Like you're doing marketing for your core role right now and you're freelancing and you're a content creator online on social media. When
Mhm.
did you start thinking about going back to school to do counseling?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of a culmination of a bunch of different factors. I've always been really interested in psychology and mental health. I have a BSc in psychology from UVic, and right after I graduated, I was definitely kind of on the track of applying to grad school to do my PhD in psychology. I wrote the GRE and everything, and I was pretty set on that, and then ended up working in a research capacity for a psychology clinic and just really didn't love that experience very much. I think what I resonated with the most was connecting with people and that aspect of it instead of the research. So that was a bit of a redirection. And then yeah, I kind of always had to balance these 2 interests of art and creativity and photography with the academic side, and I just kind of got pulled into this world of traveling and photo and social media, and I really loved it, and I love the connections that you form with people, and I think it just kind of, like, reached a time, and I'm 27, almost 27 now, where I just kind of felt like I'm ready for a change. I want something that, I can really dive in and have my career for a long time and that I feel very fulfilled by. And I think, yeah, that was kind of what inspired the going back to school part while also kind of juggling this other side of my identity.
Very cool. Definitely want to dive into the counseling area. Maybe before we do
Yeah.
that, and this is something that I've been talking to quite a few past guests about who have a presence on social media, like a significant presence. And yeah, knowing what you know now, like in your schooling, and also just you said you've always had an interest in psychology. Like, how have you approached kind of building your personal brand online with the knowledge of, psychology, and like how have you approached that from a mental health perspective in terms of making sure that your mental health is okay?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think for my personal page and like my own kind of personal content that I create, a big value of mine has been authenticity. I think that there's a lot of upward comparison and just kind of really tough imagery out there that portrays not very realistic lifestyles or people or even, yeah, just like faces and bodies. So it's always been super important to me to kind of not be a part of that problem as much as I can be. And then in doing so, I think that makes me feel better about myself. But yeah, it's a tough world out there for sure. I think like so many people are using social media right now. And we know that it can be hugely impactful on your well-being. And you take in a lot of content all the time. So I think just as a user, kind of mitigating your own risk by managing your time on social media and who you follow. And then as a creator, just being very mindful of the kind of content that you're putting out into the world and just making sure that it's with a do no harm kind of perspective.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Is there anything that most folks like wouldn't see that, I'm thinking like comments and like DMs, or, just like really like have you had to build up some sort of resilience or boundaries, or like, what are the hardest parts of having kind of such a large kind of, I guess, open following, like a public following rather?
Yeah. I mean, I've been very fortunate in that I have not experienced cyberbullying personally, which is lucky because I think it does happen to a lot of folks who show up online the way that I do. But definitely, like, as a woman on social media, I don't believe that this is exclusive to somebody who has a large following, honestly. But like, I've gotten a number of pretty horrible DMs privately from men that are just like super inappropriate. But I would say that that's honestly probably like the worst kind of one-on-one direct interaction that I've had online has just been discomfort, and it's pretty manageable because you can just delete a DM.
Yeah, sadly, that this sounds like par for the course. It's really sad that's the case. Like,
Yeah,
oh my goodness.
I know, and it's just kind of one of those things that just happens, and I think it's almost impossible to avoid, unfortunately,
Right.
right now.
And I also wanted to, yeah, ask you about your love for nature. And like, I know a lot of your content is around just being outside and camping and exploring and that sort of thing, which is incredible. Especially, I'm living on Vancouver Island now as of about a little
Yeah.
over a year ago, and from Ontario. So that's it's an amazing accessible benefit to those of us living out here, or even just in Canada. It's usually pretty accessible. But yeah, how has your relationship with nature evolved over time, and like what do you get out of spending time in nature?
Yeah, that's a great question. I grew up on the West Coast. I grew up on a really small island called Bowen Island, which is just off of West Vancouver, and I just feel very fortunate to have been in a community and in an area where I was very much surrounded by natural outdoors for a lot of my childhood, and it just became like a very integral part of who I am and part of my self identity, and that I had a family growing up that spent a lot of time in the outdoors and taught me a lot of skills that allowed me to kind of push myself in the outdoors and build that community of people who want to be in nature. when I moved out from home and when I moved to Vancouver Island, for example, for school or back in Vancouver. Those skills and that passion and aspect of my self identity just like really stayed with me. And I think that, yeah, it's feels like being outside and the need to be outside and spend time in nature is kind of part of who I am at this point. And I just find it very therapeutic and healing. And yeah, it's just a great source of community and joy for me.
Just a quick interruption to chat about my company, First Session. Have you had a less than ideal experience looking for a therapist? There are lots of options out there, but it's hard to know where to get started and who to trust. My company, First Session, focuses entirely on creating the best experience finding a therapist. We vet and verify each therapist we work with, interview them on camera, and allow you to browse on your own time to see who you vibe with. You can see updated availability and book directly with them. No phone calls, no email back and forths. Run through videos and find the right therapist for you the first time at firstsession.com. I love that. I love Bowen Island. I got to spend a lot of time there when I was.
Well, I'm glad you visited. Yeah. It's very small.
It's got the best vibe and it's so close to the bigger city. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's inspiring to see just this beautiful images and videos of just like, I don't know, just the whole West Coast. Like I can't wait to explore more up north on the island and on the Sunshine Coast and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm super lucky to live here. Yeah. And so just like the language you're using and things like your identity and, parts of your identity and things like that, like I'm kind of a therapy obsessed person myself and done quite a bit of therapy myself. And I like almost minored in psychology, but you just couldn't quite get the guy that I wanted. I've really got nothing to show for it on paper, but like where did this kind of like language come from? Like, have you done a lot of self-exploration over the years? Like, have you done a lot of therapy over the years, counseling? Like what can you share about that?
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting because I don't have a very storied history of like regular therapy. I've definitely been to therapy and have found it very valuable. I think that language, just having the tools in my back pocket to be able to apply it to myself has come from studying psychology, probably. I think that has definitely helped. I think just also naturally, I'm just like a pretty introspective person. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of journaling. I find that it's like very helpful for me to kind of understand my own emotions and self through writing. And I think that like a lot of that language kind of comes out when I put it on paper. So I think that is kind of where it comes from. But definitely the more I learn in school, the more that you kind of develop this eagerness to apply it to yourself. I think all humans are like that. We want to, you know, make it about us a little bit, but it's helpful, right? Like it's helpful to have the tools and the language to just to know more about yourself and how you want to show up in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been quite open about your experience with depression, living with depression is I think how you phrase it. And yeah, as someone myself who's experienced several years of depression where I felt really stuck and I also kind of shifted, I guess, I'm kind of assuming here, but also kind of shifted my mindset to kind of trying to relinquish the control of, over my state of mind, right? And I think that was kind of freeing for me. This is about 10 years ago. Yeah, I'm curious, like, I have so many questions about your experience with depression that we'll see where this goes. But even just like your language of saying, living with depression, like how did you arrive at that kind of verbiage? And I know a lot of folks might say I have depression or I am depressed or
Yeah.
whatever. Like why do you choose those words like living with depression?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the language has shifted in the past few years surrounding just for a lot of these disorders. I mean, particularly, for example, for folks with living with personality disorders, you might say this is a person living with BPD, like borderline personality disorder, instead of this person is borderline or this person has borderline. And I think that it just kind of allows you to separate this mental disorder, this monkey on your back from being intrinsically a part of you. And instead it's something that just kind of walks along beside you. It doesn't have to be tethered to your identity. It doesn't have to be all of you. It's something that's with you, and you can talk to it and relate to it and take a break from it as well. And I think that language is really important in the way that we talk about ourselves and our relationships and our life. And just it's a small difference, but I do think that it does impact how we relate to these diseases and how we feel and just kind of how we think about ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, I think it like, literally on paper, it seems like a small difference, but I
Mhm.
view it as a pretty huge difference myself. And so when you say that the language has changed, do you mean like in academia, like in the kind of teachings of psychology and psychotherapy, or personally, like your language, or both?
Yeah, I think like I've noticed it socially for sure. I think that it is kind of developing into like mainstream discussions about mental health. People are saying that living with or this with. Yeah. And then in practice, I think that it's shifting as well. I think that people do relate to that language shift and it's almost imperceptible, but I do think it is important. And it's definitely not like a black or white thing. Like it's not wrong to say one or the other, but that's just a shift that I personally, yeah, identified with and liked and have used ever since.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm in the same
Mm.
viewpoint as well, and yeah, sometimes I mean I know that a lot of folks can get so much kind of relief when if there is like a diagnosis of some sort that it can be kind of freeing for a lot of folks
Mhm.
who might be so lost in how they're feeling and secluded and alone. But I also know that like it can really become the cornerstone of a lot of folks' identities if they identify with a mental disorder. Like, I know a lot of folks are, like, putting it on their social media profiles and things like that, right? And I think, in trying not to judge that, but it, like, sort of it just seems like that then becomes so much more real and more static almost in a way, right? Where I think, yeah, it can be really freeing, but it can also be restrictive at the same time. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone processes these experiences differently and finds solace in a diagnosis or frustration in one. I think for me, it was definitely the former. Like it's relieving to have an explanation for the way that you feel often. I think that, and it opens up resources, which is great. But I do feel that there is kind of a fine line between, you know, understanding the disorder and using that title to, yeah, just open up tools that you can use to improve your life and enhance your well being versus identifying with it to the point of, you're kind of down a rabbit hole of feeling like you're stuck with it. And I think it's just a balance of whatever feels right to you, but it's important to remember that there is, life is vast and varied and multifaceted and there is no one singular identifier for a person and it's certainly not your mental health forever at least.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that approach. I think a lot about how people approach getting help or getting resources, or I guess even just the concept of like personal work on oneself. That is
Mhm.
kind of where my company lives in that space. And I find that depression in particular is really challenging because of the nature of depression being so draining and so, yeah, like you're just so unmotivated, right? I remember like even my experience with therapy really didn't like I had a bunch of like single sessions and maybe a handful of like sessions here and there, and until after I started first session, this company that I have is when I like spent 2 years in therapy and did a lot of stuff, and now I'm looking for my next therapist. But I think people who are depressed, like how would you almost describe what it's like, and like if someone's feeling depressed for the first time or like it's getting worse for the first time, what might you say as far as like how to what can you do to try to get out of it in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's varies by individual for sure, and depression can take on a lot of forms. I know for me personally, how it's often manifested is more physically than emotionally. Some people can have, persistent negative thoughts and feel really sad and be very teary. And my experience personally has been more of a deep physical exhaustion and lack of motivation and what we kind of call anhedonia, like just feeling very flat affect. And that is not that's absolutely not my normal way of showing up in the world. It feels very foreign to me to feel that way. So when I'm feeling depressed, it's like it feels awful, right? And it's very obvious to me that that's where I'm at. But yeah, I was introduced to this kind of little model called like the red light model when I think I was 18 or something. But it was a very just helpful tool, and it's a great activity to do as an individual of, you know, looking at green, yellow, red light. And if you're at your green light, you're doing great. Things are going smoothly, you're feeling good. And it's a good reflection to reflect on, what do I feel when I'm in the green zone? What does my life look like? What do my daily activities look like? What am I doing? Yellow zone is, maybe I'm sliding towards being in a depressive episode, or sliding towards burnout, or sliding towards, something that is going to be more drastic and scary. And I'm recognizing that. And what are the first kind of signs for me personally that show up when I'm heading towards, you know, the sign that something isn't going to be very good? And for me, it's like I slowly start to lose interest in activities. I may not want to hang out with friends as much. My appetite changes, things like that. And the whole idea is to just be able to recognize when you're in these stages. So when you are in like the red light zone, they say, which is when, for me personally, that's a full depressive episode. The idea is to be able to put in interventions to get out, to get back to green as soon as you can. And I think that it is personal. Like, you can look at a biopsychosocial model, like what can you change in your environment biologically that will help you feel better? Can you exercise? Dopamine release from exercise is huge. It's been shown to be just as effective as SSRIs, if not more, in some studies. Are you completing tasks that make you feel good physically? Are you showering? Are you eating enough? Are you sticking to, good sleep hygiene? Psychological, can you go see a therapist? Can you see your friends? Can you talk it out? Can you journal? Can you reflect on these things? And then socially, it's so important to just look at the social environment that you have around you. One of my favorite Freud quotes is, before you diagnose yourself with depression, make sure that you're not surrounded by assholes, which I think is great. But just like really leveraging your social circle and the people around you, and making sure you're safe in your relationships. And yeah, just leaning into connection is huge. So that's kind of like, yeah, the model that I use to first notice where I'm at in my kind of mental health, and then B, interject at wherever step I am in order to kind of get to a better place, hopefully.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because it doesn't seem super like scientific, or like it seems fairly, you don't have to be like, I don't know, journaling every single day, or like, wearing all these
Mhm.
monitors or whatever. It's just kind of a bit of reflection can help you, and just those three lights. I'm curious if I think this is like, I don't know, personally, I think like the worst part of my depression, in order to fully, I mean, it took me kind of years to get, I guess, fully out of that zone, but I tried so hard to control, and like I would like sprint on the treadmill, even though like it was like, I think it was a lot of like anxiety combined, but like I would just try to like fight my way out of it. And it's just the interest levels and the, like not wanting to smile, not wanting to be social, like kind of that disconnecting feeling, which I know a lot of, therapists say it kind of like just builds on itself. Like these things, the more that you hide away, the worse it's going to get. So, but yeah, so fighting, like it seemed to kind of, it just got so exhausting and wasn't fully helping. And then, yeah, at one point I was like, well, I just changed my mindset to it, my relationship to it. And maybe it's not fully in my control. And maybe I'll actually, I think at this point I was feeling like a little bit better, but like maybe I am not in control of how I'm going to feel. Maybe one day I'll be depressed. And I do believe that now still that like, things could turn darker for me. And there's something freeing about that. And it almost sounds suppressing to almost say that, but at the same time, it's like there's something freeing about it that relinquishes you from holding the like key to your own mood. I don't know if that is relatable at all. But at the same time, I think there's so many other things, environment, people, food, sleep, exercise, that have been really great for me, at least. And I guess my question for you is that with this kind of green light, yellow light, red light model, and sounds like I think you said you were 18 when that first kind of came on your radar. Do you notice like less, like have you sort of like gotten better, I guess, at noticing and like trying to prevent or trying to intervene? Or has that not been the case? Can it has it been just kind of evolving up and down over the years? Like, are you better at catching yourself early and then kind of intervening, or can it sometimes just go the other way?
The answer is yes. I'm definitely better at noticing and being aware of my mental state. And sometimes I can catch myself before I slide into that. I definitely have had like a few years of not having a full on depressive episode. And I think part of that, was learning about those states and how to kind of maximize my well-being with the tools that I have. Part of it was medication was really huge for me. But you're right, like you cannot control your brain and you can't control your life. And that's the same for people who live with depression or not. Like life is very unpredictable, it's stressful, it's hard. There's going to be trauma and crises and grief, and if your brain naturally doesn't, have the same chemical balance as someone who's neurotypical, that can make it a lot harder. And I do think that there is a lot of power in just surrendering to being a human and an animal and giving yourself grace and patience and kindness and, acknowledging that for everyone, but particularly me in this moment with what I'm going through, I cannot snap my fingers and change it. And the very best things that I can do is just, all I can do is my best at this minute, this second, this hour. Maybe my best is getting out of bed. Maybe my best is calling my mom, you know, and that's okay. And it does not last forever. It won't. And I think that is the sole source of, hope that sometimes you can grab onto is just acknowledging, hey, I can't change this right now. This feels like crap, but it's not going to feel this way forever. And all I have to do is just put one foot in front of the other at whatever speed that I can in this moment. And I think that sometimes that just has to be enough. And it's hard to get to the mindset where you are extending the same kindness to yourself as you do to others when you're in a state like that. Very difficult to really, truly believe that when you're telling yourself that.
Yeah, that's very wise. That's very wise. That's amazing. I'm curious if you'd be willing to chat a little bit more about your experience with starting medication and how you approached that. There's a lot of different opinions on medication and a lot of different experiences. And oftentimes I know it can make people feel worse. So I'm curious how your period of starting medication went and how you got to the point of getting some relief, if that was easy or difficult or somewhere in between.
Yeah. So I was in university and I was having my first like real kind of prolonged period of depression ever. And it was very scary. And I was really lucky to have like a great female doctor at the campus clinic who I seen throughout the year. And she had been suggesting medication for a long time for me, and I was very resistant to it. I didn't like the idea of taking medication. I was embarrassed. I was frustrated. That might be something that I would have to do, and I really didn't want to even think about it. It kind of got to a point for me where I felt like I had been trying everything, and it just didn't feel like it was working, and I just needed to try something because it was absolutely unsustainable the way that I was feeling. So my experience with medication has personally been good. I take an SSRI. I've been on SSRIs for like 4 years now, and I'm on a lower dose than I was when I started. I don't know if I'll be on them forever. It would be nice to not be, but if they continue to, make me feel better, then I'm not going to go off them. I think medication, like if you had a heart disease and you were in immense pain and there was a medication that could help you with that, why would you not take it, you know? And it's the same with medications that help stabilize your brain chemistry into a way that's a little bit more normal and allows you to move through life the way that you should be. But that being said, SSRIs I think they're only effective for like 40% of people, like less than half. So, it doesn't always work. And that's really frustrating. And I do think that there is kind of an endemic problem in our medical system where, doctors are not trained or they don't have the bandwidth to go over kind of a holistic strategy for mental health with people. And that is often the first line of defense. And I personally don't feel that it should be. As I was saying, like exercise, multiple studies have shown that exercise can be just as effective as medication for people with depression.
Yeah.
And that was never suggested to me by a doctor once. It's a important conversation. Medication doesn't work for everyone, but it's a tool in the arsenal that is effective for some people. So I wouldn't completely disregard it either.
Yeah. No, I noticed that your approach to this is, I mean, it just comes with so much kind of, I imagine, kind of like self-advocacy or just education. And I mean, I see a lot of that with people in our generation, but like when speaking with parents or my parents, for example, I think in our generation, there's a lot less just one directional, like just take the doctor's orders kind of thing. And maybe that's because the system looks different these days than it did like a generation ago. What I kind of hearing you say is that it's so important to sort of bring your own knowledge and research and awareness in, like with exercise. Like I see that in the UK, they've been prescribing exercise, for a long time,
I
right?
love that.
And
Yeah.
that's still not happening here. And I think people here, part of my job has been trying to unconfuse people around the differences around like what's a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a
Mhm.
psychotherapist or a counselor or a social worker or a doctor, and like who can
Yeah.
prescribe and who can't. And then like looking at those professions and like, are some of them covered? Are some of them not? And it's just the education, I guess, is not, as far as I know, provided in like the regular education system to know that, like in elementary school or in high school, I think, right? So I
Mhm.
think it's easy for a lot of people just to call their family doctor, or many people don't have family doctors, go to a clinic, explain your symptoms, whether that's depression or anxiety or something else. And then the system really can only just write a prescription, right? And then a lot of those don't work, or a lot of them might have negative side effects. So yeah, I think just having these conversations and just like giving people the almost like push to be their own advocate if they're able to, right? And do their own research, which I know is a lot kind of difficult sometimes too, because Googling, a lot of therapists will say, don't Google your symptoms
Yeah.
or doctors, right? So yeah, no, I think that's amazing. But so back to your kind of interest in becoming a therapist, was there any particular like experiences or therapists that you worked with that inspired you to go on this path, or is it how did you end up doing your master's?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if there was like a specific moment or person where the light went on and I thought, aha, I want to do this. I think that just as a person, I think I've always known that I wanted to be in a helping field. That was very clear to me. Just like personally, I found that that was something that I really resonated with and I found a lot of fulfillment from. I volunteered kind of in like mental health helping capacities through high school and university and best buddies and mental health teams and just really focused on connecting with people. And I think empathy has been a very core value of mine. And it was just something that just kind of clicked and felt good. And yeah, I don't know. It's always been something that I've been interested in. And I think that there are obviously other fields and professions that, do similar things and they could have been or would be equally, rewarding. But I'm really excited I love what I'm learning. I'm excited to graduate and start working. And yeah, it's definitely a cool field. There's a lot you can do with it.
Yeah, I often intermittently consider going back to school for counseling or some PhD, but I'm, you know, constantly trying to read or listen to podcasts and learn. So I also wanted to ask you about your, again, in your kind of writing, I guess, about your mental health, your depression. I think you referenced that you like feel very deeply. And like sometimes you wish you didn't. I wonder if you
Yeah.
could kind of elaborate on that and how you kind of, I guess, feeling deeply kind of makes sense when a lot of other people maybe not feel as deeply or apparently not feel as deeply. So how did you kind of, I guess, come to that kind of conclusion or that you might like feel deeply relative to others?
Yeah. I mean, I think like I can remember being a kid and being told by my parents that I was like a deep feeler, you know? I think I was just like very emotive and I have a very hard time like hiding the way that I'm feeling. I've always been somebody who cries at something beautiful, just like quick to feel big emotions and resonate with things and find things important and feel just like a lot of empathy or pain on behalf of other people or situations. And that can be really tough. I remember even in like, I think I was a teenager in one of my first relationships, and my first boyfriend was like, "You feel too much." you know, it's difficult when people don't understand that that's kind of like you just respond to the world. You're a very responsive person. And I do think that, you know, we're not all so different but we have different ways of kind of manifesting those emotions and processing them and deciding how much they mean to us, whether subconsciously or consciously. But yeah, I think that it's a blessing to be able to feel things so deeply overall because it creates meaning.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm a huge, I guess, follower or fan of Dr. Gabor Mate. I know he's very popular these
Mhm.
days, but I know he's also from Vancouver, or at least
Yeah.
immigrated there. And I really like his viewpoint of looking at like predisposition for mental health challenges. I won't say mental illness here, but being predicated on like a sensitivity like index almost. So like
Mhm.
how like people vary in their sensitivity, but that sort of has a correlation with, other mental health challenges. Yeah. And I can definitely relate to that myself as well. And so my family members as well. And yeah, just curious how you, yeah, I imagine you're in line with that way of thinking too.
Yeah, for sure. I remember taking like a psychology of well-being course when I was in my last year of university. And there's this theory called the orchid theory by David Dobbs. He's actually a geneticist, but it's this idea that, the genes that predispose people to be sensitive, because the idea is orchids are sensitive plants, right? They require care and nurturing. And there's this idea that kids with predisposition to be sensitive and, maybe have a bit of anxiety or depression or, a predisposition for more troubling human behaviors. In the right environment and with the right support, you know, those predispositions can also end up being some of the best and most beautiful attributes of those people too. A child who's predisposed to be very anxious or maybe depressed in a nurturing environment in which they feel safe and, you know, aligned with their identity and confident can grow up to be a feeler and a deeply creative person and have a lot of empathy and use those emotions in a really positive way. So, yeah, I love that theory and I love how science based it is. And I think it's just like a good way of looking at, you know, just because you interact with the world in maybe a deeply passionate way that might be different from others doesn't mean that's a bad thing. Like it can be a strength.
Yeah, I love how you seem to just kind of lean into that. And I know like when your boyfriend at the time kind of said like, don't feel so much or don't,
Mhm.
I imagine a lot of other people who feel deeply or more sensitive or, have a similar experience. And I know I used to be like that when I was younger too. And you almost, if you're told to not feel deeply, then you're going to feel like you're not allowed to feel, right? And that presents other challenges. Did it take some time for you to kind of lean into the fact that you're someone who feels deeply? Like how if someone is feels like they're unrelatable to their circle around them because they're a sensitive person, like what would you say to them as far as
Yeah.
like getting out of that kind of trap or
I mean, I think I definitely am not out of the trap by any means. Yeah, I think that it's about giving it's I keep saying giving yourself grace, but I just think it's so important to just be nice to yourself. And when people are told, as you were mentioning, like the way that you are feeling isn't correct, it only enhances the shame that people experience. And shame is so toxic. And, it just makes psychologically and physically, it's just a really horrible thing for people to carry. And I just think it's so deeply important to learn to release the shame and just practice radical acceptance of who we are and who others are and move away from the black and white thinking that one way of perceiving the world and emoting is the right way because it's just not the case and it's complicated. It makes the world infinitely more complicated and being a human much more difficult, but it's true.
yeah, that's what I well put. I've had a lot of therapists that I've interviewed and just through observation, like kind of a lot of what therapy is, or I think almost the core purpose of therapy is learning how to be kind to yourself. I
Mm.
think some people, well, most people have a really difficult time with that. And it needs to be something that you learn. And there's this voice that you can't get rid of and might not even be your voice. It might be someone else's voice. So yeah, and I think it's so beautifully put. So where are you at with your schooling and what's kind of the next year look like for you?
Yeah, so I still have a couple courses left, and then the bulk of the final 8 months of my degree are practicum. So to register with the RCC in designation in BC, you have to have a certain number of supervised practicum hours from a registered psychologist or counselor. So yeah, it's going to be 8 months of that, just gaining hands-on experience, which I'm really looking forward to. I think that will be great. But yeah, right. I'm in course load work. I'm in like a crisis and trauma course and an ethics course. Those fun ones.
Nice. That sounds
Yeah.
very exhilarating, but also dreadful. School is not my favorite thing. So
I know it's been a bit of a shock to like go back to school after I'm trying to think a 4-year break, 3-year break. Suddenly you have to submit essays and deadlines on Sunday nights and things like that
oh
for
my
sure.
goodness. Yeah. Well, yeah, I know like even in the business world, like a lot of like people teams, HR teams really value like that degree as well, like masters in counseling and see more like former counselors become like head of people or something. So yeah, it's really like there's so much to do there. So yeah, props to you for going through that. That's amazing. And
Thank you.
yeah, anything else on your plate or that you want to share happening in the next, 6 to 12 months for you?
Yeah, not really any like big plans coming up. I've definitely kind of focused the next number of months really deeply on finishing my degree. It's been pretty full on for me. But yeah, I think for me, the focus is just going to be on reaching those goals and, also finding time to travel and keep up with my freelance work, which I find really valuable and pays the bills. And, it's an important part of my life too. So it's just kind of managing that as things shift and grow.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And finally, where can people find you online?
Yeah, I would say probably my most active location right now is my Instagram page, which is Annie MacIntosh, Annie with 2 E's. So I think that's probably, yeah, where I'm on the most. I'm also on TikTok. I have a website, but I'm not very active on it right now. But yeah, I can always be reached on my Instagram. My email's up on that page. Well,
Amazing.
so yeah,
Well, yeah, thank you. I'm sure not too long in the future you'll be on some counseling website, whether it's your own or at a group practice. So I'm sure folks can find you
that's
then.
the goal.
Awesome. Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much, Annie, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and a weekend ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to chat.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Actualize podcast. You can find the show notes for this episode, as well as all other episodes, at firstsession.com/podcast. If you like this podcast, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.